So the Rippaverse is plugging along. And if you've been paying attention to social media and anything going on, there is an entire Twitter saga. And I think this actually relates to the Rippaverse and some things Eric July has said. So unless you're living under a rock, you know that Elon Musk has bought Twitter. There's been a bunch of things going on there. I'm going to get into an article that kind of goes over some of that. And I think this is related to the Rippaverse, and I will explain how. It's in a roundabout way, but what happened at Twitter exposes what goes on in the hierarchy in most businesses and most business avenues, right? You have entertainment, you have sports, and there are gatekeepers, and you can be kept on the outside, not invited to the party, and really stifled. And this kind of makes me believe that most of what we see today, as far as growth in any respective field, not all, I say most, I can't say that with 100% assurance. Let's just say a lot of it is not organic growth. Anyway, Rippaverse is plugging along. There are people that are still hating. Here's what's amazing. In a good way and a bad way, there's many mainstream comic book websites that are not covering the Rippaverse at all. Still to this day, it is done great numbers. There's a lot of excitement. There's room for improvement. It is not perfect, but it is exciting. I always bring up Image Comics because in my lifetime, that's the closest thing I have to what I see in the Rippaverse outside of DC's Milestone Comics when they had a bunch of black creators. And it's funny, right? Because there's a bunch of black creators in the 90s that created Milestone Comics. This is where you get Hardware, Static Shock, Icon, Blood Syndicate. They were good books. They weren't, again, just like anything, they weren't perfect, but they were very good books, easy to read, good art. And the thing is, that black content studio, that collective of black creators, I mean, it was really organic. It didn't feel like it was forced. It felt like this was something that organically happened, and it was good. I enjoyed it. I bought the reboot of Hardware. Hardware was one of my favorite comics. Not as good as it was. Of course, there's a lot of things infused into the new Hardware that I'm not particularly a fan of, but it is what it is. But I said all that to say, outside of Milestone, Image Comics is the closest thing I can remember to what I see happening with the Rippaverse right now. And Image Comics had their blunders when they started out. They were brand new. Yes, they were comic professionals, but they were brand new, starting out something, an entirely new venture that had not been seen before in comic books, right? Content owned by the creators and them just doing their own thing, just doing it collectively under one house. And it was great. You know, I loved it. I love DC, Image Comics, excuse me. There's a lot about it that I did love. To me, the Rippaverse has that same excitement. Now, Eric July is doing some different things that I didn't expect this fast, but I guess he didn't expect this level of success as fast as he has had. And it appears from what he has said that he is actually working on other books written by other people, of course, with him having creative control, which again is one of the things I appreciate. I'm going to go to some tweets from Eric July and look at what's going on with the Rippaverse. Now, I'm sure if you've been paying attention, if you enjoyed Rippaverse comics and you're not living under a rock, these are probably things you already know. But I want to bring awareness to this as a comic book geek because this is exciting, right? This is a new venture that doesn't suck. That's the biggest thing. With all the criticism I've heard of the Rippaverse, and rightfully so, right? There's things that can be improved, but some of the criticisms I think is actually unfair because it's not, when I hear a criticism of the Rippaverse from a lot of the haters. I'm just going to keep it real. It's not a matter of, yeah, they can improve in this area, that area. It's like, oh, this is bad. This is terrible. And I'm like, hold on. There's room for improvement, but this doesn't suck. This is actually a very well done storyline. The art is great. The lettering is good. Like, this is good. So yeah, we're going to get into some of these tweets. So Eric July has stated he is, if you're listening to the podcast, I have his Twitter feed pulled up for the Rippaverse. And he says he has 78 pages of completed pencils and ink of ISUM number 2. I'm excited about this. So I would imagine, I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine the process for ISUM number 2 is probably going to be a little quicker than it was for ISUM number 1. You know, when you first start out doing something, you have growing pains, things you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. And these things you learn in action. It's hard to learn these things just by sitting on the fence, watching on the sidelines. When I started my podcast, there were things I didn't know, right? I'm an audio guy, but there are things I didn't know about audio when it comes to recording a podcast that I learned as I've grown. There's things I didn't know about the video element, and I'm still learning, right? I've done things much better and much more streamlined now than I did when I started my podcast. When I started my podcast 3 years ago, it was rough. Not this podcast. I started another podcast 3 years ago and branched off to do another podcast and this one that I'm doing now. But anyway, I said all that to say, I expect this process for ISUM number 2 to go a little quicker, maybe even a lot quicker. Delivery is probably going to be a lot faster. I'm sure they've worked out some things, figured some things out. And this is what I think has gatekeepers within the comic book sphere a little nervous. Because if this book did this well and he was just figuring things out, just getting his feet wet, getting his footing, figuring out what was going on, what's going to happen when he has all of this figured out? And the thing that really is an axe to the industry is the fact that he is, as much as he can, he is doing this as independently as possible. So he's not depending upon the very industry that would ostracize and keep him out. So there's really not much they can do. He's not depending on them advertising. And as I said, if you go to any mainstream comic book website, which I've gone, I mean, some may have reviewed his stuff now, but as of a few days ago, I checked and I went to all of the most well-known mainstream comic book news and blog sites. And other than some smaller sites that are more independent leaning, you're not really seeing anything about the Rippaverse. And in my opinion, what is there hotter news in comic books? I know there is a Spawn Batman release coming out, and that's going to be great. I can't remember if it already came out. I don't think it did. I think it's coming out. That's going to be great. You know, we already know. The people who are comic book fans of Batman, fans of Spawn are going to love that. But so I'm not saying that there's nothing else intriguing and hot going on in the comic book sphere. What I'm saying is there anything in the comic book sphere right now that is hotter than the Rippaverse? And I just don't think so. I don't think there's anything amongst comic book fans, maybe not amongst the gatekeepers. And this is where I say this Twitter story kind of falls into this. Not with the gatekeepers are not talking about it, but the people who read comic books. I'm seeing pictures across the internet of new readers being introduced to comic books with the Rippaverse, of people who have been into comic books for a long time, excited. I am in a group on Facebook, fans of the Rippaverse, and there was a podcast. Forgive me, I can't recall the name of the podcast. It was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Me and the host of this Facebook page and a few other people just discussing the Rippaverse. And you could tell talking to these guys are guys who've been collecting comic books for a long time. They're not new, and they're excited about this new venture. I think comic books, for the most part, as far as stories and art, have kind of lost their way. When I go to the comic book store now and I look through, thumbing through, okay, what am I interested in? What do I want to buy? It's not much. There was a time when I was growing up where you could not walk into the comic book store and not find something that was so intriguing you had to walk out with. And there's several times now I walk into the comic book store and I walk out just completely unfulfilled, thinking to myself, why did I even come? So here's something else that is tweeted from Rippaverse Comics. Rippaverse 2023 plans update. 3 books in the works. That's exciting. With ISOM number 2 planned for first quarter. Be sure to follow all the official Rippaverse accounts across all social media platforms to stay up to date. There's going to be a lot going on, I would imagine. Now, in this picture, you see in this image that he has on Twitter, right under this, you see Isam, Yaira, and I cannot remember the 2 other characters' name. I just drew a blank right as I was looking at this. But anyway, this kind of alludes to what's coming. If I had to guess, there's going to be a Yaira book coming out that kind of explains her backstory and who she is. And then there's going to be Alpha Core explaining who they are, who they came about. And there's probably going to be some more lore building with the Rippaverse going on and happening. So now, let me get to this Twitter story. And I want to express why I believe this is relevant to Rippaverse in the sense that you get to see how the gatekeepers are moving, what the gatekeepers have been doing. So here's a story from Bounding Into Comics. Former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey attempts to save face after Elon Musk censorship revelations. Here's the thing. Do you think that Twitter was the only company censoring people to which they did not agree? I think it would be kind of foolish to think that this is the only place where this happens. Excuse me. And I also think it's kind of foolish to think that news is the only entertainment venue that this happens in. And this is why I think this spills into comic books. How many comic books do you think never saw the light of day because the powers that be said, no, we don't want this to be propagated. We don't want a comic book with these ideas to be out there in the atmosphere and for people to read. We don't want anything different than our prescribed method and our prescribed narrative for how comic books should be enjoyed. I really believe that does happen. What was going on at Twitter is, in the same vein, what they carried out is, we don't want any narrative contrary to the narrative we believe should be shared out there on the internet. Okay, I'm going to read some of this article. Elon Musk has made it his mission to expose the corruption of Twitter's previous leadership ever since his acquisition of the company back in October. Now, you can believe what you want about Elon. Some people believe he's a shill. Some people believe that none of this is real. He doesn't really care. This is all an act. It may be. I don't know Elon Musk personally. I cannot tell you one way or another. What I can say is he is definitely exposing many things going on or that happened within Twitter during the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years of election cycles. And it's really some crazy and interesting stuff. Okay, he says, over the course of the last couple of weeks, Musk and his team have been exposing the rampant corruption within Twitter's old leadership. Most notably, how the company operated behind closed doors to silence its user base, particularly those on the political right. And again, the way I believe this applies and is relevant to the Rippaverse and what we see going on with Eric July, things have changed. It's easier for you to start your own business and to get information out there. Even though, now, I don't know if I'm shadow banned on YouTube. I think I am, and I have reasons to believe that. But regardless, I can record this video. You can share this video. People can listen to this video. Narratives can be questioned. You can hear opposing opinions and viewpoints worldwide. That was not always the case. There was a time where a narrative can be completely controlled, because how were you going to get to the masses? Before the internet, if you had an opposing viewpoint, how exactly were you going to get that viewpoint, that opposing point of view, from point A to point B without using the established method for doing that? The internet changes all of that. Cell phones change all of that. I can record a video, put it on my cell phone, and send it to somebody and have them send it to somebody they know, and so on and so forth. And that thing can spread. I'm not going to say that can't be stopped, but now I would say the powers that be are at the point where you're playing whack-a-mole. You might stop this method, but then there's another method, and you might stop those two, but then there's four more. You can't completely stop a message from being spread. When you look at the things coming out of China, as locked down as China is, there is still images and videos coming out of China despite their best efforts. And if there was any country that had the ability to censor their people better than anyone else, it is China, in my humble opinion. And yet and still, images and videos are still getting out. It's like I said, it's a game of whack-a-mole. Okay, among the growing list of controversies exposed in the Twitter files are the revelations that the company did in fact suppress the story surrounding Hunter Biden's laptop in order to protect his father during the 2020 election, that the FBI had a direct line to Twitter staff through which they could flag tweets they didn't like, and that staff made such decisions as banning, then setting President Donald Trump and suspending users who voiced up opposition to government COVID-19 policies based on their own personal whims. Now, and here's the thing. I'm pointing this out, and this is relevant because this is what tends to happen to people. You believe that if you just don't pay attention, to anything going on in politics, it won't affect you, right? Because this has nothing to do with comic books and geekdom. This won't affect me. And here's where you're wrong. You read comic books. You are a fan of, let's say, Marvel or DC. These CEOs, these rich conglomerates over these companies have connections to politicians in one way, shape, form, or another. They do, because they're business owners of multinational, huge businesses. They have vested interest in certain things, whether it be for financial or other reasons, whatever the reasons may be. So what goes on in politics will trickle its way down to whatever it is you enjoy. So I said all that to say this. It seems, I'm not saying I have any data per se, but just at a cursory glance, it seems that there are many artists, writers, colorists, inkers within the comic book sphere that are going independent. Now, you might ask yourself, why are these people going independent, or why does there seem to be a rise in independent creators? I think for several reasons. I think some of these people have wanted to create certain things that they have been precluded, not been able to create because of the gatekeepers in these industries. They've pretty much been told, no, you cannot make this. You cannot create this. We do not want this. This is why I say this Twitter story is definitely directly correlated to the Rippaverse. Why is it that in all these comic book blogs, well-known blogosphere, well-known news sites for comic books, the Rippaverse is not being discussed? Well, there's a reason. They don't want anything outside of what they can control to ever reach the eyes of fans, the eyes of consumers. They don't want that. One, they don't want competition. I get it. This is the way of the world. They don't want anything that competes and goes against their prescribed narrative, whatever that prescribed narrative is. Whether it's just, hey, we want comic books to be created in this way and this way only, and we don't want somebody else to come along and show fans that we could have been doing this a better way because it's going to cost us money to do this that better way. We're going to have to change things, and we can maximize our profits by just keeping it exactly as it is. Look, I get it. You're in a business. If you're not in a business to make money, you're fooling yourself. You want to make money. That's what this is about. And I understand that. But the problem is, if there is a better way and somebody comes along and can do this in a better way and you shut them out because you don't want fans to know this, well, now you're screwing the fans over. I get it. You want to make money, but you're making money by screwing the fans over. There's a better way. And I think what Eric July and his Rippaverse is showing, there are people that want something better, that want something different. They don't want ideas shoved down their throats. They just want a good comic book. And this is something that people obviously have and are thirsting for, and you can see in the way that this comic book is being received. So let's go on reading. It says, Twitter has also been proven to have shadow banned and deboosted right-wing users even after Dorsey testified in front of Congress testified in front of Congress that the platform absolutely did not engage in such censorship. Now, he lied about this, obviously, and he knew. There's proof in the Twitter files. If you've not seen any of the Twitter files, you can go look up any videos discussing it. It's pretty crazy. But he knew that they were censoring people who thought differently outside of more left-leaning thinking. Do you think this does not, again, I asked this question earlier, I ask it again. Do you not think the same thing happens in comic books, in movies, in music? If you have a certain bent towards a certain ideology, you're going to be shut out. You might create, but your creations will never reach the eyes of as many people as it could because the gatekeepers will not allow it to. And here's where things are changing. And I believe people within the established order, whatever you want to call it, are seeing that change. And there seems to be this David versus Goliath fight behind the scenes, because what you're having is you're having things pop up, creations pop up that are outside of these prescribed narratives, outside of the scope of what is the norm, and they're actually making waves. And those waves, those snowballs are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're coming to a head where now fans are seeing, wait, there's something else I can be looking at. I mean, when you look at the amount of news channels that have popped up on the internet that have become big almost overnight, and I think it's because people are like, yo, I'm tired of hearing what they're selling me. I don't believe it, and I want to hear something else. Let's go on and read this article. Asked by Democratic Congressman Mike Doyle if social media is being rigged to censor conservatives, Dorsey responded no. Are you censoring people? Doyle followed up, to which Dorsey again said no. And look, anyone with a working brain knew that this wasn't true, right? So again, bringing this back to comic books. You ever go to the comic book store and you wonder to yourself, so there's nobody who's coming up with something else, something independently? Like nobody has any ideas outside of what you see from Marvel and DC. They're the big two. I mean, there's other content houses. You have IDW, you have Dark Horse, you have Image Comics, but let's keep it real. They're not the juggernauts that DC and Marvel are. They're there and they are big. I'm not saying they're not big, but DC and Marvel, they're juggernauts. But you mean to tell me there's no one else that has come along that has created some other comic book universe that's good, that has good art? No, I think these things happen. I think they're just shut out. I think that there are creative ways that these companies have of making sure some of these things never see the light of day. Okay, narrowing the focus of his inquiry, Doyle then questions Twitter's shadow banning prominent Republicans. Is that true? For a third time, Dorsey insisted no. This is crazy because, again, we know this is a lie. Now we do. Back then, we had a strong suspicion that, yeah, you're lying, bro. I don't think this is true. But now we know it's a lie. All right. Later pressed by Republican Congressman Joe Barton on whether or not Twitter discriminated based on politics, Dorsey asserted, no, our policies and our algorithms do not take into consideration any affiliation, philosophy, or viewpoint. Dorsey also defended the site's moderation policies to such popular podcast hosts as Joe Rogan and Tim Pool. And if you've never watched a Joe Rogan episode where Tim Pool came on and they had Jack Dorsey and Vijay Gadde, who was at the time head of trust and safety or whatever, legal. Yo, Tim Pool ate these two alive. And it wasn't like a gotcha moment. He was just asking legitimate questions and pushing back with legitimate commentary like, yo, what about this? And they had no good answers. However, thanks to Musk, journalist Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss, as well as author Michael Schellenberger, I think how you say that, we now know that Twitter did in fact take against politically dissenting accounts, almost all of which identified as right-wing, including media personalities like Charlie Kirk and Dan Bongino, who in direct contradiction to what Dorsey said to Congress, were shadow banned for their views under the guise of visibility filtering, all about wording. Anyway, I said all that and I went to this just to show and prove a point. These things affect other things. What was going on Twitter affected politics, and what goes on in politics definitely, if you're not aware of this, I'm here to tell you what goes on in politics definitely affects what goes on in entertainment. If you don't know that, I'm telling you right now, it does. And I believe that system of control is being challenged and even broken down because now you have so many dissenting voices on the internet that you can't quiet all of these voices now. It is a game of whack-a-mole, and I believe it's a game of whack-a-mole that the establishment, despite all their efforts, will not be able to win.